Ricky Pearsall had a breakout performance on Monday Night Football. We'll discuss his dynasty value heading into 2025 next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we are breaking down the Lions 49ers game on Monday Night Football. Hopefully, you're celebrating a big championship win coming off of that game. But, Kate, let's talk about the 49ers side of things first. Not a ton of takeaways, but I did want to mention Ricky Pearsall. This was a breakout performance for him. 8 for 141 and a touchdown on 10 targets. The leading receiver for the 49ers in this game. I actually thought he looked really good. What were your thoughts?
Looked really good. And I'm going to be honest, this feels like it came out of nowhere because watching Ricky Pearsall in the weeks leading up to this game has been a bit of an eyesore for me, if I'm being totally honest. Has not been able to find any way of consistently contributing. So it just kind of makes me wonder, what was it about last night's game plan that benefited Ricky Pearsall so much?
Well, they threw a lot of in-breaking routes and a lot of out-breaking routes where you can see the route running ability that we saw when he was playing at Florida. Like, he's not a contested catch guy, not really a yak guy either, but somebody that can just create a lot of separation. And actually, I think that works with Brock Purdy. Purdy throws with a lot of anticipation. He's fairly accurate. And I think you saw the two work together really well.
Yeah, I think that's a really key part of this is just kind of maybe the pairing in terms of skill set and figuring out how to best utilize that skill set to work with what Brock Purdy does well. Now, the question is, do you believe in it? Like, is this a game that's going to swing your potential view of Ricky Pearsall? We already know this has been a super strong draft class here of rookie wide receivers. But Ricky Pearsall has always been the odd man out, let's say, in terms of his dynasty value. Does this change anything for you?
A little bit. Watching that game last night, I was just thinking in the back of my mind, like, oh, he's running all of the routes that like Brandon Ayuk was running earlier in his career. Ayuk suffered a major knee injury. Now, it was earlier in the year. Maybe he'll have a chance to come back and make it back for week one, but I doubt it. And then I went and looked last night as I was kind of preparing for this podcast. Ricky Pearsall is wide receiver 49 in dynasty leagues. And you just look at some of the names that are going ahead of him, like Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, Cedric Tillman, Jacoby Myers. And it's like, I trust Kyle Shanahan. I trust this offense to be very fruitful. We'll see how the rest of the wide receiver room shakes out with maybe Deebo Samuel being gone next year, Ayuk's injury, Jaywan Jennings. I think I am buying Ricky Pearsall.
And I mean, yeah, the draft investment here was kind of significant. And I think everybody was a little bit surprised to see Pearsall land in this situation because of kind of the embarrassment of riches that it felt like they already had there on the roster. I'm not letting this sway, too much, but I do think that it was kind of eye-opening to see he's capable of a game like this. Now, another circumstance to consider, and I don't know we don't have enough information at this point to know whether or not this is any sort of long-term concern, but Brock Purdy did exit Monday Night Football with a nerve issue in his elbow. I don't know what that means. Something just to kind of monitor and see, is this a potential long-term issue? Is it just one of those things where got hit kind of awkwardly, pinched a nerve, he'll be fine with some rehab, etc.?
I think he just banged his elbow, to be honest with you. It didn't look like
Funny
anything.
bone?
I think a little funny.
That's so funny when you're an NFL player, man.
Yeah, I know. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he got some kind of like bruise on his elbow and that made it where usually you bang your funny bone, it hurts for a minute or two and then it's back to normal. But if you get a bruise on it, it can last a couple weeks. And with the 49ers already eliminated from playoff contention, they're going into week 18 with absolutely nothing to play for other than draft picks. It makes sense to hold him out if he's feeling anything. So I'm not concerned about Brock Purdy. I'm also just not concerned, Kate, about this offense really ever, because even if Brock Purdy was injured or not ready to go, Kyle Shanahan's a wizard, and he's going to figure out a way to get this passing attack to work. So
Josh Dobbs came in and made it happen. Very interesting. Now, maybe the question about Brock Purdy is not about bringing up the injury. Maybe it's about what has Brock Purdy done this year. So if this is the last down that he has played in the 2024 season, what does that mean for his value? Because before the season, we were talking about a potential $90 million per year extension. Where does he stand right now? Because
I still think he's going to get $50+ million a year. I think something like the $60 million talk was crazy. Him being the highest paid quarterback in the league. I don't see that, but like an extension around like what Jordan Love and Trevor Lawrence got and what Tua got, I think obviously makes a lot of sense. And I know there's some people out there thinking, well, maybe the 49ers won't do that and they'll let him walk or they'll trade him. I don't see that at all. I'm not the biggest Brock Purdy fan, Kate, but I actually think he played better this year than he did last year. I know the numbers don't indicate that, but last year he had, basically an entirely healthy offense, right? McCaffrey was awesome. Debo was good. Brandon Ayuk was fantastic. Kittle was younger. The offensive line was better. This year, injuries galore on that offense, right? And the numbers are still pretty good. Even last night, I know the 2 interceptions were bad, but he averaged 10.8 yards per attempt, 116 passer rating, and he's throwing to Ricky Pearsall, a rookie receiver, and Chris Conley got a big target early in the game. He dropped a gorgeous pass to Isaac Guerrero down the sideline. I think this year, even it not being as strong as it was last year, has made me a little bit of a Brock Purdy believer.
I think if nothing else, it maybe cost him a little bit in terms of the average annual, salary. But I think in general, maybe what we saw from Purdy was that the floor could be pretty safe for a guy like Purdy, at least in Kyle Shanahan's system, which he's shown the ability to execute at a high level. So I think you're right in that regard. Maybe the stats haven't necessarily always shown up on that, but I think there's a ton of circumstances that are to blame for that are far beyond the concern of Purdy. Maybe he's regressed in terms of efficiency a little bit, but I also think maybe he's looked more just like an NFL quarterback, and he's shown some resilience.
Really quickly, before we move on to the Lions side of things, just let's stack these wide receivers for the 49ers going into the 2025 offseason. In terms of how you would order them in dynasty value, how would you stack up Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Jaywan Jennings, and Ricky Pearsall?
Let's go Brandon Ayuk.
Okay.
I'm not assuming that Debo is going to be on the roster.
Okay.
So I'm just not even going to regard him.
Okay.
I think my biggest question mark is Pearsall versus Jennings, because one, you have the potential and you have the draft capital. The other, I think you have a proven track record that he's a really good NFL wide receiver, and he is a capable X. I think that's a very valuable position to have in a Kyle Shanahan offense. But how much does it mean once Brandon Ayuk's back? So given the fact that, we kind of had him step into the Brandon Ayuk role, I'm going to go ahead and give Pearsall the edge there, just based on kind of the potential role in the offense that he could hold versus Jennings with Ayuk back full time.
Yeah. And I really like Jaywan Jennings. He might be like one of my favorite players in the league. In terms of dynasty value, I think like once they get the receivers healthy, I wouldn't be surprised, Kate, if he kind of goes back into that role as the third receiver, the guy that comes in on obvious rundowns and blocks. He's just a very good overall player. But I think Pearsall and Ayuk are better pure receivers. And I think that's why Kyle Shanahan will use those guys more often in the passing game, Jennings more often as a run blocker. All right, let's talk about the Lions side of things. Jahmyr Gibbs continues to be awesome. Jared Goff, 300 yards and 3 touchdowns once again. But let's talk about Jameson Williams, who led the Lions in receiving yards and touchdowns in Week 17. We'll discuss his dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? It definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize that I was still paying for, but Rocket Money made it so easy to track them down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It'll monitor your spending and it'll help you lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, the last podcast of 2024. We'll be back on Thursday to get you ready for Week 18. Some games that actually still really matter. We'll talk about some players that you want to try to acquire this offseason, so make sure you tune in for that. Okay, let's talk about the Lions side of things. Jameson Williams, 5 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. Also had a rushing touchdown off of a lateral. Williams is already over 1,000 total yards this year. He's up to 8 touchdowns. What are your thoughts about Jameson Williams moving forward?
Jameson Williams is kind of an interesting piece here in this offense. He's found some consistency. He's one of the most productive receivers in terms of yards per reception this year. I still somehow don't fully trust it. And I think my issue is the fact that this is a team whose identity is very intrinsically tied to running the football. We did see, him involved in some end arounds and some rushing attempts, which was fascinating to see. And it makes sense with the kind of speed that he has. But generally speaking, I don't know what to make of Jameson Williams because we've seen a fairly even target distribution, right? Jameson Williams had 8 targets. Sam Laporta, 8 targets. Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver 1, 10 targets. So the even target share there makes me a little bit wary to trust the overall involvement when I know that, when healthy, there are 2 running backs that are going to command the football very, very often. They're probably going to have a change at OC. They are really good at spreading the ball around pretty evenly to all of their top receiving prospects. I don't know.
So I think for me, I've never been this massive Jameson Williams fan. I think he was a little bit overdrafted back in the 2022 draft. But I think you're starting to see him figure things out, Kate. And I think you're starting to see the Lions trust him more. Over the last 6 games, he's averaging exactly 7 targets per game. We've seen him become a pretty steady player in this offense. Just look at his receptions. 5, 5, 3, 5, 5, 5, 4. Like he's getting touches. This isn't somebody who is only catching 1 or 2 passes a game. He's averaging almost 19 yards per catch. It just seems like to me, this is somebody who looks fully healthy. He tore his ACL in 2022. So I think he's past the knee injuries. He's comfortable in this offense. I think Jared Goff's confidence in him is growing. Now, you're right. He's always going to be down on the pecking order behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. But when you're this explosive and this dynamic, I mean, he's scored touchdowns in 3 straight games now for the Lions. it does feel like, or at least for me, my trust in him is going up. And I think what happens in the playoffs, and obviously this game against Minnesota in Week 18, is going to go a long way in deciding and changing his dynasty value.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we know that dynasty managers and I mean, redraft fantasy managers, NFL fans in general, like we can be pretty, we can let recency bias kind of kick in and seep through and paint our picture for the following season. So I can envision Jameson Williams being one of these guys that has some explosive plays down the stretch, maybe won you a fantasy football championship with his play on Monday Night Football. And suddenly you're looking at that 2-touchdown performance and you're saying, okay, like let's try to get more Jameson Williams in shares. Like, but the question is, how much is he worth in Dynasty? So right now, Jameson Williams, wide receiver 29 on Dynasty League football. He's 23 years old. We know he's fast. We know he's on a good offense. Does that seem right ahead of names like Xavier Worthy, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Michael Pittman?
I would rather have Worthy straight up for a couple different reasons. But I do think you look at some of the names ahead of him, Brandon Ayuk, Jordan Addison. The one that I'm struggling with, Kate, I would love your thoughts here, is Jalen Waddle, who's going to be 27 next offseason or this offseason. He's also the number 2 option in his passing attack on an offense that's just, frankly, not as good as what Detroit is. I'm having a hard time not just picking the younger speedster here. But overall, I think wide receiver 28, 29 feels just about right.
I think it, like, the way that I'm looking at Jameson Williams is if I can go into my drafts or, if he's not a guy that I need to consistently lean on as a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, I think that seems more palpable. His overall ADP, 48. I think, I mean, that's interesting. It's, tail end, 4th round, 5th round feels a little high on principle, but I guess if he's not the focal point of your lineup and he's more of the like the side dish, right? He's not going to be your entree. He's going to be your side dish that complements the entree. I don't mind that so much.
I would also want Williams on my team where I have multiple options at flex, and maybe you just play Jameson Williams depending on the matchup, or maybe depending on the over under that week. Like we knew last night, this 49er Lions game, there was going to be a ton of points because neither defense can stop anybody, right? So you play him in these games where we expect a lot of scoring, and then maybe there's other weeks against like a Minnesota where maybe you don't play him and you play somebody else that maybe has a higher floor. I am interested in Jameson Williams at that wide receiver 28, 29 price tag. If it gets inside the top 25, which frankly, Kate, I'm not going to be surprised if it does. If he has 2 good games in the playoffs and it's 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, we're going to see him start jumping some names like Chris Olave, DJ Moore, Jaden Reed. And that's when it's going to get too expensive for me. But right now I'm buying.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I just hope he doesn't have any more blowout performances just for the sake of keeping that value at like a fair market value. But I do think if it rises much higher, I'm going to be totally out.
Yeah. Before we move on, any thoughts on Allen Robinson's dynasty value? 1 catch, 21 yards, 1 target.
Marcus, I'm going to be honest. I heard them call the name Allen Robinson, and I was 100% convinced that must just be like another Allen Robinson until I clicked on his ESPN profile and I was like, Allen Robinson? I mean, 1 catch, 21 yards. That's a 21 yard per reception average. Hard to beat. That led all the Lions wide receivers and San Francisco's wide receivers last week. So, I mean, come on.
I did want to mention Jahmyr Gibbs. Back to being a featured running back, 117 rushing yards and a touchdown. Also added in 46 yards in the receiving game. Just a complete stud. Like anybody that had any concerns about him not being an every down back, I think those are completely gone. Okay, let's talk about Ben Johnson, who Seems like he's pretty clearly the best play caller in the NFL right now. How concerned should we be about Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown if he leaves this offseason? We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcast. All right, Kate, let's talk about Ben Johnson, who is the most highly sought after coaching prospect probably since Kyle Shanahan. Back in 2016 when he was the offensive coordinator with the Atlanta Falcons. It's funny that they played against each other last night. It seems like Ben Johnson is a lock to leave this offseason. How concerned are you about all the players on the Lions offense if and when Ben Johnson leaves?
I've been kind of grappling with this all off season long, or all season long, because I do think that it feels like there's more opportunities Ben Johnson can maybe find a better fit for. I think last year he elected to stay with the Lions just because he didn't find that perfect fit of what he was looking for. And it seems like there might be some more opportunities here this offseason. Of course, there always are. But there are opportunities that I think might be considered among the more favorable, right?
Yeah.
So let's say he goes on. Let's say he leaves the offense. We kind of already have done this dance before, right? We did this last year when Dave Canales left the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, kind of downgraded all of these players. We wrote off Baker Mayfield after having a breakout campaign, and guess what? It didn't matter.
No.
This was just a really good offense, and they were able to find a suitable replacement that could fill the shoes. Now, I think we overrated it there for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think it's worth considering, but maybe not as much as we had thought.
Yeah, I'm not super concerned about it, Kate, because to me, the Lions just feel like a really good organization. And I feel like Dan Campbell is going to attract really good offensive coordinator candidates, right? Like, who wouldn't want to come in and coach all of these guys? So I think it's going to be a downgrade, but not enough for me to be concerned about anybody on this offense.
And here's maybe the tiebreaker, right? Like, if you are looking at an offense whose talent level is far, the production on the field is far surpassing what you evaluate to be the talent level because of scheme, etc. I think that's when you need to dial it back a notch, right? I think Ben Johnson, a very key aspect of this offense, but when you look at the raw talent of the players, the physical attributes, this is just a gifted team in terms of skill set, athleticism. If nothing else, even without a proficient play caller, these are just really good NFL players. This is one of the best skill position groups in the National Football League, and we should have also probably taken that into account when we were looking at the Buccaneers. Some really talented receivers to continue to uplift that quarterback position, and we missed it there. I think that's maybe the lesson I'm going to take away from having maybe overcorrected last year with the Bucs, tempering those thoughts and making sure we don't overreact. But again, kind of looking at the overall talent level of the skill position players as a temperature check in terms of evaluating just how much we should panic.
And I'll give you another example. And I just happen to know this one because it's the Cowboys. When Kellen Moore left in 2022 to go be the offensive coordinator for the Chargers, I think there were a lot of people wondering, like, hey, it's Mike McCarthy running an offense and not Kellen Moore. We should discount all of their players. And Dak goes out and he finishes second in MVP. CeeDee Lamb has a monster year. Tony Pollard has a solid year. Jake Ferguson becomes a top 5 tight end. Like, more often than not, these teams that have good organizations and good quarterbacks and good rosters. They figure it out. Dan Campbell's also an offensive-minded guy. He was a former tight end. He was a tight end coach. I just trust that the Lions are going to figure it out. Maybe we'll see a slight dip in efficiency. I think that's only fair. I think it's fair to think there would be a slight dip in efficiency next year, even if Ben Johnson were to come back, because the numbers they're posting this year are absolutely ridiculous. So there's a chance that even if he were to return, some of these guys wouldn't live up to their fantasy values. So I'm just not that concerned. I want to see who they hire as their offensive coordinator. I trust that Dan Campbell's going to get it right. Just not panicking here, Kate. There's just no reason to.
Now, give me your prediction for where Ben Johnson goes, because if, we're worried about the play calling decreasing, or the quality of the play calling decreasing with the absence of Ben Johnson, then that means, the Lions' loss is another team's gain. So who is the gain? Because maybe if you think there's like a natural fit out there, maybe we should be buying some of these players before Ben Johnson comes into town.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know for sure what jobs are going to be open, but we know a couple of them. Let's just go through them really quickly. The Jets, no way, because I think what Ben Johnson is looking for is a stable organization with a good quarterback and an owner that's not going to meddle. That's not the Jets, and it's not the Saints either, who don't have the quarterback. And they don't have the cap space either. I think the Bears are interesting because they do have the cap space, but I don't necessarily see him going there. I don't see him going to the Raiders. I don't see him going to the Cowboys. I think Jacksonville, if they move on from Doug Peterson, is the most likely destination, because I do think that is a good ownership group. I still believe in Trevor Lawrence. You have Brian Thomas Jr., who is a superstar at the receiver position. That would be the one spot that I think is the most likely if Ben Johnson decides to leave.
A lot of depth in terms of those skill position players as well. So plenty of toys for Ben Johnson to work with there. But I mean, out of all the teams you listed, I think that fit definitely makes the most sense. If Ben Johnson were to leave, it just feels like the most stable situation that he can also probably make the most of day one stepping into the organization.
Can I tell you where I'd like him to go?
Cowboys?
No, well, I mean, yes, but that's in terms of like him. I mean, like if the Bengals decided to move on from Zach Taylor and you put Ben Johnson with Burrow and hopefully T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, that would be a lot of fun. That's like the super version of what the Lions have, assuming they can upgrade that offensive line. But I can't wait to see where Ben Johnson goes, because I think as soon as he signs on with whatever team he decides to pick, we're going to see a massive rise in all of the dynasty values of the players on that roster. And I can't wait to break it all down. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen of the day, your first listen all year long. It was a fantastic year here on the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Hope you guys won your fantasy championships. We're going to get you ready for Week 18. I know there's some silly leagues out there that still play fantasy championships in Week 18, but we'll do that. We'll also get you ready for the NFL playoffs, because we know that fantasy values and dynasty values are going to change throughout these playoff performances, like we saw from Gabe Davis a couple of years ago. Maybe that's a bad example, but you know what I mean. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. We will be back on Thursday to get you ready for Week 18.